Well, good evening, everyone. Sarah B. NWE, and I am here this evening with the amazing Mountain Mamas. And hello, Sarah B. NWE, and I am
Hello.
here with the amazing Mountain Mamas. And hello. Okay, somebody's got their Facebook on, and we're getting a lot of feedback.
Yeah, hop out of Facebook.
Okay, somebody's got their Facebook on, and we're getting a lot of feedback.
Yeah, hop out of Facebook.
Okay, somebody's got their Facebook on, and we're getting a lot of feedback.
Yeah, hop out of Facebook.
Okay, somebody's got their Facebook on, and we're getting a lot of feedback.
Can we all just mute ourselves for a second and then go back off mute?
Yes, please. Hey, everyone. Thanks for tuning in. We're going to finish get our technical difficulties out of the way now, so we don't have to worry about it anyway. Welcome, everybody. Let's see if we can bring everyone back in. All right, guys, why don't you unmute yourself one by one? And then we'll go from there. I hear nothing, no feedback yet. Hey, everyone. Thanks for those of you that are joining. If you would, let us know if you're getting any feedback, if you can hear that. But otherwise, I think we're okay. I'm not hearing anything. Wonderful. Welcome, ladies, for tonight's Mountain Mondays with Mountain Mamas. Glad to see everyone's here. We are going to have some other candidates joining us a bit later, and some incumbent elected officials as well. Let's just go around and introduce ourselves. Kat, you want to start?
Sure. My name is Kathy Ferguson. I'm running for the West Virginia House of Delegates in District 35.
DL, you're up.
Happy Mother's Day and yesterday. I hope you all had a good one, but I forgot to have children. But I'm the mama of Mountain Mamas, DL Hamilton. And I'm messaging Sammy because she can't find the instructions. Oh, she says she thinks she found it. So Delegate Sammy Brown, our incumbent tonight, will be on shortly.
Brittany?
Hi, I'm Brittany Barlett. I'm running for House of Delegates in the 46th District. That's Lewis and Upshur counties. I'm a high school teacher that was actually just finalizing my grades for the end of the school year. It's been a hard day emotionally for me, so it's good to be here with you all.
Patty?
Hi, everyone. I'm Patty Hamilton. I'm running in Kanawha County for the 35th District, and I feel for you, Brittany. That is a tough day. I hope we can brighten it up for you.
And Selena.
Hi, I'm Selena Vickers, and I'm running for House of Delegates in District 32. That is all of Fayette County, part of Raleigh, Nicholas, Clay, and a little bit of Kanawha County. And I was doing the same thing as Brittany today, except with graduate courses, and so got all my grades in.
Wow.
Wow. You guys have a lot on your plate, let me tell you. All right, Dio, you want to get us started and tell just a little bit about what we're going to talk about today?
Well, that wasn't what I was going to talk about. So let me first just say that I hope you all are having a nice chilly Monday, but I still have my heat on. And I was thinking about what I was going to say. And when I was saying chilly Monday, I was thinking about, I used to have a playlist for Mondays, and now that I'm retired, Mondays don't mean the same. And it got me wondering, how many people are back at work and now know what day it is again. So it got me thinking, and one of the favorite songs on that playlist was Monday, Monday, Can't Trust That Day. Because last week I was saying Mountain Mamas were good medicine. And so my word for today is trust, because, I have communicated with these women, watched them work together, and I just really trust them to be on your side, to work together, to work with integrity, to say what they mean and mean what they say. So you can trust Mountain Mamas. And I'm probably going to go backstage so that you can listen to them, and I'll come back at the end. But I did want to thank several donors because I admitted that I didn't budget well, and those $20 and $25 boosts added up to a lot, and Facebook takes it out at the end of the month. And so here I was broke for the last month of campaigning. So I reached out. I have several $100s now, and reminding you of the new website, which is what took most of our funds, mountainmtnmamawv.org. We're going to be launching that this week. And so what we really need you to do is to share that URL, especially if you are an influencer or you have friends who a lot of people follow their pages on Instagram and Facebook. If you could please get our website out, because I think that as we gather emails for people who are fans of Mountain Mamas, that it is the way that we can really move this to another level in terms of actually connecting supporters with Mountain Mamas for some hands-on help with texting and phoning and postcard writing and things you can do when we can't be out there campaigning as usual. So with that, I will follow my instructions about what we're going to talk about today. You know, we had kind of separated these in categories at the beginning of deciding to do Mountain Mamas Monday, you know, and we knew infrastructure was important and put pipelines and broadband and of course roads in that category. But there were also some systems, because I was remembering when there was infrastructure money, a former Speaker of the House, Joe Albright, was trying to get prisons to be infrastructure so he could use that money. And he was convinced that no, prisons are not infrastructure, but they are a big system. And our judicial system is a big system. And someone last week asked that we also talk about the foster care system. So that's what today is all about, our infrastructure and our systems. And as you all know, they both need a lot of improvement in West Virginia. So let's hear from the Mountain Mamas about those topics today.
All right. Well, DL's going back into the green room where hopefully we've got some treats set up. So yes, we have a lot on our plate tonight, folks, and we definitely want to hear from you. If you have questions for our Mountain Mamas, please let us know in the comments and we will answer them as quickly as we can. And if we don't get them to today, we will be sure and respond to them in a timely manner. So I'm going to bring Delegate Sammy Brown in here too as well. So just real quick, we're going to give just as a rundown, we're going to give a voting update, absentee ballot update. We're going to do, again, touch on roads, infrastructure, highway systems. We're going to talk about COVID-19 update. And then we've got a little bit of interesting facts about women in the legislature in West Virginia here. Delegate Fleischhauer will be joining us about 7:30-ish this evening. So stay tuned, listen in, ask questions, get involved. As someone who has worked for the executive and legislative branches before, I can tell you this is a group of women that may not always agree on everything, but the one thing they do agree on is working together and supporting each other. And that's very important in today's political climate. So without further ado, let's get started with Patty Hamilton with an update on absentee ballots.
Thank you, Sarah. The reason we're updating every week on is because we're in uncharted territory. I mean, this is unprecedented to have the absentee ballot voting available to every single registered voter in the state. So it's new to everyone. As of today, with absentee ballots, there were 207,725 applications received. That's the application for the ballot. Of those, about 49% were to Democrats, 34% to Republicans, and 13% to no party. Now, the ballots returned, that's what really counts, because those are the ones that have actually been voted and sent back to the county clerk. 78,968 ballots have been returned. Those include about 48% Democrat ballots, 36% Republican ballots, and 11% no party ballots. 34,598 requests have been from no party. Those are people who are unaffiliated. They are registered voters, but they do not affiliate with a recognized party. And they can request a ballot. And it's very important, I want to emphasize that they request the ballot they want, either Democrat or Republican, on their application. Otherwise, they will get a nonpartisan ballot. Of the requested ballots, about 12,872 were Republican requests, 10,415 no party, and 9,940 Democrat, 100 Mountain. And there's about 1,000 where there was no data collected. So to summarize this, 6.58% of the 1.2 million voters have voted. That is more than double the number of absentee ballots that are ever seen in an election year. And that's in just about 2 weeks that the ballots have been out for voting. So that's actually, doesn't sound like a lot, but it actually is quite meaningful. May 19th is the last date to change your registration or to register to vote. And last week I emphasized that if you know a 17-year-old who's going to be 18 by November 3rd, get them to register and vote, and they can vote in the primary and the general. One little caution, if you get an absentee ballot or you have applied for one, use that ballot or take it to the poll if you decide to vote in person. That's really, really important. You cannot show up at the polls and say, oh, I threw it in the trash, I didn't vote that ballot. You can vote, but you'll vote a provisional ballot. And the county clerks really don't want a whole lot of provisional ballots. So the best thing to do, if plan A is vote in person and plan B is your absentee ballot, take plan B, your absentee ballot, with you to the poll. And the poll worker will do what they call spoil the ballot, which I don't know what that means. I don't know if that means they put a big X on it or just throw it in the trash. I don't know what it means, but it shows that you haven't voted that ballot and showed up in person. So that's a word of caution on that. And if anyone has any election questions, feel free to put it in the chat and I'll be happy to answer them. Thank you, Sarah. Thanks, everybody.
Well, thank you. We put some numbers up for everyone that hopefully I got them right. If I didn't, please correct me, Patty. I was trying to keep up there. So those are pretty interesting numbers for, like you said, a time that we've just never experienced before. So, well, let's just jump right in to our next topic, which is road systems. I can speak. Going to my parents' house this weekend, it was a rough ride at times. Who wants to jump in on this conversation, on this topic? I know, Kat, you were interested in maybe talking about unincorporated.
Yeah. So I apologize in advance. It looks like there's a thunderstorm coming this way, and I think it's just kind of making my internet unstable. So if I disappear, I'll be back prayerfully. But yeah, so I just wanted to touch on some of the infrastructure issues. I mean, clearly West Virginia is in a serious need of repair roads and the like. There was legislation that was passed to make sure that our roads are up to speed. But I think for unincorporated areas, there's a lot of turf issues in terms of who's responsible for what. And because it's not a municipality, they're not able to necessarily get the type of remedies that they need. So very often you hear folks arguing over whether it's a state road, a county road, whether it's something that touches the highway, the land that touches the interstate, and whether that's a federal issue. And so you've got a lot of phone calls that you're making and no one that comes to address those issues. So that's one of the things that I can speak to, or at least from my experience living in an unincorporated area. And then also too, looking at things like the sewer projects. So I'll just speak from, again, personal experience here in the Institute area, there was a $9 million project that was sort of foisted on the community. No participation in terms of, who got to sit on the board and represent the community. But nonetheless, we have some, folks that are there finally. But that $9 million project turned into an $11 million project. And before that, there was a proposed increase of 131% for a sewer bill. That's very, can create a lot of hardship for folks in this particular community. It's an underemployed community, a lot of elderly people living on fixed incomes. And so 131%, it's a drastic increase. So it ended up being increased by 80%. But now that you've got this $11 million project, it's going to increase again by another 80% proposed beginning in January. So it really is actually making a lot of folks that aren't necessarily landowners or homeowners here, think about moving outside the area because they can't, afford the cost of living. So I think that as we're moving as a state, looking at issues of infrastructure and how it's paid for, that we have to make sure that we're sensitive to the economics in those individual areas and make sure that we're not pricing people out of communities. That's just very important. So, certainly there are other issues in terms of, the potholes and things. And you've got, looks like Jurassic Park, dinosaurs have just come down and taken big chunks out of the road. Even in Dunbar, when you're going across the bridge, you can see rebar, just physically there as you're going across it. And you're like, is this a stable bridge? So I think we've received a D- in terms of infrastructure statewide compared to all the other states. And, other states aren't A pluses, but we certainly can get our average up to at least B, C, B. So that's pretty much what I'll say about the infrastructure issues.
Anyone else want to jump right in? Brittany, why don't you unmute yourself and
Yeah, so I had two things that I just thought of. I know that in like the most recent study that they have, that big trucks like oil gas trucks cause the same amount of damage as like 10,000 cars roughly going over the same area. So there's definitely like a disparity between how much damage we're causing to the road, like on my little Subaru compared to, an oil or gas truck going over that same location. And another thing that I know is that we've had a lot of problems with outsourcing Department of Highway work. So we're seeing a lot of people from outside of the state doing work here. And, there's nothing necessarily inherently wrong with that, but why aren't we employing our own people? And, if you have someone who lives in my community and is doing work on a road that they're going to drive across every day, they might put more time into it or passion into the project because it's something that's going to affect our community directly, whereas they might not feel as bad about cutting corners if it's in a community in a state that they're probably never going to drive through again. So these are two other issues that we can point to. But Kat, that was a lot of information that I didn't know about, so thanks for sharing that.
Oh, no problem. And I think I had mentioned before, about the whole issue about these big giant, corporations coming in, and they are, responsible for a lot of the wear and tear. And then we actually have to deal with the consequences of that. And then a lot of these areas too, again, in unincorporated areas are areas where you have to pay for your own lights. And so when you have companies that aren't paying into the tax base, when you have companies that you can't collect B&O taxes and that type of thing, it just leaves a lot of communities just woefully underdeveloped and really having to rely on their own selves in order to actually meet their basic needs of transportation, lights, and that type of thing. So, and in fact, speaking to the out of state too, when I talked to some of the folks that were working on our sewer project here, there are two teams. One is from West Virginia and one is from Ohio. So very interesting.
Interesting. Selena, let's go to you next.
So it's all really, really good information. And the issue with kind of like big, coal and oil trucks and the damage they do, it's all really significant. But to bring it back home, when I, because of the coronavirus, we're not able to knock on people's doors, and I've been doing a lot of phone calls, and it has really surprised me. People who, and they will tell, I always ask people what their big issue is. What is the thing that they would like me working on if I get elected that really would help them and their families? And they have big issues. I mean, they have, living wage issues. They have, the drug epidemic issues. They have education issues. But it's so very often they bring it back to the importance of having roads and bridges. And in a state like ours, where we have, lots of mountains and valleys, if your bridge is out, that can make the difference of an ambulance getting to your home in 15 minutes or in 45 minutes if they have to, if a bridge has been washed out. So it is, it really affects a lot of issues, kind of pocketbook issues. How much money are you spending on gas and car repairs if your roads are bad and things like that. But you cannot put a price on somebody's life. And the fact of the matter is that if we do not have really good infrastructure in terms of roads and bridges, it could mean the difference of somebody's life. And so, being really committed to making sure that we have that infrastructure is just critically important to people's lives.
Absolutely. Anybody else want to hop in? I will just share real quick that it also, we've heard in my past life working in the nonprofit, one of the things we heard was, grandparents not getting their grandchildren to doctor's appointments, and it was due to the lack of transportation or transportation related issues. On my way to my parents' house, there are 2 areas where there is only 1 lane because the other lane has completely washed away. It's gone. There's nothing there, a big hole in 2 places. So it's a big issue for everyone. I mean, there's typically, a long line of people waiting because it's intermittent for people to get through. So you're exactly right, Selena. It could be a fact of life or death to get an ambulance in there.
Mm-hmm. Just to chime in to the conversation, which, hi everyone, how are you? Good evening. I do have the legal pad with me mostly because I'm looking at some of our live comments, and then of course in my own watch party, and seeing a lot of the comments and trying to take notes from not only the really great feedback from our women, but then of course the constituency that we're looking to represent across the state. And there's a lot of really great feedback in general when we do these. So that being said, in the Eastern Panhandle, some of our infrastructure problems very much reflect what's going on throughout the state. But then also we are looking to be interconnected with a tri-state area. And so when we're having conversations about infrastructure and how to develop outward and inward, intrastate as well as interstate, I find myself often wondering how we can incorporate that connectivity that we're looking to really establish through DOH and DOT. So we also have the additional localized issue of the MARC train, and looking to additionally fund and create that structure so that our folks are having a commuter rail that gets them to their respective jobs, out of state coming into our VA center in Martinsburg. So we're also trying to make sure that we have those healthcare services that were lifted up by the women that were speaking so far today. We are looking to service veterans that otherwise don't have those services out of state. And then also, I often imagine a day that I can have this conversation that, all 6 of us get to speak to how our commuter rail has connected us from, whether it's me in Jefferson County or our folks across the way in Fayette or Kanawha or Wood or wherever the case may be, what that could actually mean as far as growth and economy in the state of West Virginia. It's also a little disturbing to me as a legislator, but also as a young legislator, to have a conversation where we're having to almost retroactively fix roads and fix basic infrastructure when we should be looking towards having expediency and efficiency. But we're still talking about flood damage that happened, 4 years ago? And I believe all 6 of us in some way were involved at an activist level trying to get food and means and product to our communities and help those that were deeply affected. So until we address those issues to make sure that we are interconnected as a community, but then as a state as a whole, how could we also look to be intra-connected through surrounding states?
Very, very well said. Very, very well said. Now, it's my understanding, I could be wrong, but so correct me if there's been a report that's recently been issued.
Mm-hmm.
And I know that Delegate Fleischhauer is looking through that, as I'm sure all of you are. So we'll probably be talking about that even more so next week.
Mm-hmm.
But obviously, transportation remains a major issue here in the state. So all very good comments. And when we're talking about connectivity, whether it be through transportation or through broadband, we do have some challenges there as well. So we're going to kind of pivot to a different type of connection, and that is broadband here in the state. And Brittany, I'd kind of like to turn that over to you first to just get us started on talking about that and, you know, the challenges we're facing and what we need to do.
Yeah, so broadband is a big issue for me. Like Sammy said, we're young. I'm a teacher. I teach high school kids, and to convince kids to stay in a state where, a quarter of the people in the state don't have reliable internet or any internet at all, and then the people who do have internet, we live in a state where, my friends from Ohio don't believe me that we have internet with data caps. Like, you only have so much internet you can use a month, which is just absurd to other people. We have big companies like Frontier who basically have monopolies on the state. And I pay a lot of money for internet that is supposed to be a certain speed when really it's about a third of that in reality when I test it. And so it makes it difficult, especially now, and has really highlighted that for me as someone who's now trying to do distance learning. And I have students who cannot do my work simply because they don't have internet. And, you can mail them stuff and they try to mail it back, but that complicates things if they don't have postage or, if the mail service in their area isn't reliable. So, having internet seems like a basic utility nowadays, and we're never going to be able to be competitive with online businesses or with technology businesses, tech related industries, if we do not have reliable internet. And we have an opportunity to actually do that, because one of the bright sides of us having terrible roads is that we have so many roads that need fixed. And so you can lay fiber optic cable while you're fixing a road relatively simply. That is something that other states do all the time. It's pretty standard practice now just to get the fiber in the ground. And if we have this many, our whole state could use fixed in terms of roads. We could have fiber in our state relatively quickly if we're churning out these fixes. And so we could actually attract a lot of Silicon Valley type industry, tech industry to West Virginia, because we have a low cost of living. We're a very friendly community. A lot of people who work in tech, maybe don't have the same concerns as some industries. Like, do you have, solid schools or reliable daycare, which is something that we're struggling with right now, having enough teachers and stuff like that. So, they're young people who aren't necessarily looking for that, who are working in these industries. So we can really attract them and kind of create our own Silicon Mountain, which is always what I talk about as my little pipe dream of having some sort of tech industry that's thriving here, because we could keep our young people here by creating an industry that they could get into, and also providing them with the entertainment that they want to be able to stream movies and access social media and things that they need nowadays. So broadband is a huge passion of mine and something that I'm looking a lot into, trying to find, ways that we can roll this out and attract other, other companies to come here or to invest here and create a new West Virginia that actually is in the 21st century.
Oh, I love that. I really love how you frame that up too, Brittany. Like some of the feedback that I've personally gotten from folks that want to develop in the state of West Virginia has truly been around 3 tenets, which is skilled, sober, accessible. And I think initially folks had a kind of an antiquated idea of what accessible means. But I think that in the COVID era, if you will, in the era of pandemic, we have learned unequivocally what that accessibility could and should mean for us at this point, and brilliantly framed up, by the way, on the fact that we are distance learning. And so one of the biggest takeaways that I can give you now as a sitting legislator is that some of the learning that needed to continue during quarantine was a little inhibited. It was almost thwarted to a point because there were folks that did not have the same access due to the internet. Now, is that a fault of their own? Absolutely not. And is that something that should be laid at the foot of the educator? No. But the reality here is that we have to address this issue. We have to be mindful about how we roll this out, because it has very much shown that vulnerable underbelly of an issue that we have in this state, which is, if we are to continue to live, work, and play, that very much includes having broadband access that is accessible and affordable and isn't underfoot of a monopoly, if you will.
Yes, well said. And Marley comments, there you can see it, that, how simple is this, that, we can do 2 things at once and accomplish quite a bit there. So, and probably save money in the process doing it. Mike Caputo says hello to the mamas. Hello there, Mike. Good to see you. Good to have you. Let's see here. We had a question about middle mile with broadband. Anyone able to address that today?
I was really hoping that Brittany would dig into this one, because she's nailing it right now. So,
Brittany, do you want to take that on?
So I know about the last mile. Basically, the issue is like connecting like very rural areas with internet when it's not financially beneficial for the company to do so. Basically, if I want to bring broadband to your house out in the holler, I can't do it, because why would I pay money to lay, cable out there if I only have 2 people who are going to benefit from it over so many years? That's not going to pay me back. But there are a lot of plans out there that have been suggested. I know Stephen Smith has his Broadband for All plan, but there are ways to entice companies to pay part of that and to find grant and funding to do that. So it's not as vital as Selena was saying in terms of you can't put a price on someone's life. But when it comes to like vital utilities that people need to function normally in 2020, we really do need that broadband, and getting that utility out to them is almost as important as any other utility that we have.
Mm-hmm. And so just to piggyback off of that, first off, spot on end mile there. So what we're also wanting to talk about here is kind of that, it's a concept of shared utility or shared outlet. So with the middle mile, it's kind of anchoring someone like an institution that does have access to this and is willing to be a shared provider to those blackout spots that we were discussing. So similar concept, but also using the tenets of our community, the pillars in our community, to have a shared utility or a shared outlet, which in concept makes the utility a little bit more affordable. So all very cool policy ideas and really just ways to have a social share and something that's a little bit more equitable when it comes to making sure that we have these utilities to folks that need it most.
Well, and I would go back to what Selena, Brittany, what you commented with telemedicine. For some folks who may not be able to get, it could be actually life or death. So I would say that there is some validity to that argument as well. So, well, that obviously there's some big systems here to tackle, and let's just dig into some more since we're all ready to get involved and get going. Let's talk about system reforms when it comes to prisons and courts. Last week we talked about education, and we had some folks who really wanted us to talk about the foster care system here in the state of West Virginia. So this is a big issue, a big issue. So let's see, Kat, I'm going to start with you because I know you wanted to talk a little bit about restorative justice. So let's start there.
I was so enthralled. And my mute off. Well, I was hoping you would start with Sammy first because that really would lay the groundwork for just criminal justice reform and a lot of the work that she's really led the way on in terms of legislation here in the state. But I'll go to the opposite side, which is really about, prevention and really trying to keep people out of the prison system, out of the court system as much as possible. So for those of you who are not familiar with my work history, prior to coming here to take care of my father, who was diagnosed with cancer, I was working in the state of Maryland, and I had the privilege of working with the Department of Public Safety and Correctional Systems there, actually within Division of Parole and Probation as a crime victim specialist. And then I also worked in Prince George's County, and I was the coordinator for the county's Domestic Violence Coordinating Council. I've also worked with the Federal Bureau of Prisons, working in a halfway house. So I've worked with offenders and I've worked with victims of crime as well. I also should highlight too that I've worked with juvenile offenders, who have been adjudicated and been in certain programs. So I've worked both sides, and I think as that has evolved, as we have evolved in that space, we've entered things like victim impact statements, where victims can talk to their offenders, in court during sentencing. And then from that, we move to victim impact panels, where folks can actually, offenders and victims can come together and talk about, the situation in a conferencing style. And so out of that comes a lot of that restorative justice. Now, certainly South Africa's done a lot with that, and they've led the way. But, what we're talking about is really bringing people together for validation of the experiences of folks that have been victimized by crime. And it also helps hold offenders accountable. And it's a way to ensure that there's a sense of justice. Because very often, just incarcerating somebody, especially for lower level offenses, petty offenses, misdemeanors, and things of that nature, don't really give somebody that's been victimized a true sense of justice. Now, this is not a criminal matter, but I'll just use this as a for instance. My father had hired somebody to do some work here, and that person, ran off with the money and never did any of the work. So, he filed in the court system to try and get this person to pay restitution or give him his money back. And, there are all sorts of loopholes, and all that person had to do was say, I only have $33 in the bank. I don't have any property worth anything. And he was never able to get anything back from that. But, going a different route and maybe having conference style conversation, the materials were here, but there still was no one to do the work. Or at least some of the materials were here that person could have then been ordered, or they could have worked out an arrangement where that work could have still been done. And that would have maybe given a sense of satisfaction. So we're just talking about getting folks together. It can look a lot of different ways, but again, it's really about having that comprehensive wraparound. And I think particularly for younger people who are at risk of entering it vis-a-vis the school to prison pipeline. And even, coming out of foster care, there are a lot of kids that come out of that system that end up in the juvenile court system or in adult court systems because of their experiences. We talked about the ACEs before. And so really trying to figure out how we can shore up things for young people. And certainly, when there are behavioral issues in the school, a lot of times are truancy. These kids are diverted into juvenile justice or into the court systems. And it's unfair, and especially for people of color, because it's disproportionate. They're often seen, or we're often seen as more aggressive, or if you're a young Black woman, in school, and somebody saying something to you, you're often seen as the bully or the aggressor in that situation, where in large part, you're just simply defending yourself. So we see a lot of these cases happening in school systems, and they get stigmatized and it follows them. And then you have kids coming out of school or leaving school or suspended with time on their hands, getting involved in petty offenses and things of that nature, and it builds up. So we have to figure out a way to really stop that. And so again, wraparound services, restorative justice principles, I think are very important. Also too, in terms of, the school to prison pipeline, and really looking at implicit bias in schools and how, young people of color are perceived. And I can't let this evening go by without doing a shout out and asking for that he rest in power, Ahmaud Arbery, who was shot down in cold blood. And it even underscores, I don't even want to cry right now, but it underscores even our ability to campaign. I have a young Black nephew who I had to tell his mother that I did not want him to go with me to knock on doors when I ran before, because I was afraid for him knocking on doors and him being perceived as somebody that might harm somebody. I had a person that helped me that was an attorney who was a JAG officer and worked with the Department of Justice, who, when he knocked on people's doors to help me canvass before, people wouldn't answer the door, or if they were taking their groceries out of their car, scurried into the home. So there are a lot of these type of issues that are in all sorts of systems that make things unfair. And it's just unfortunate that that's the world that we're living in. But we certainly have to do better about how we address those things early on and fix it. And certainly the systems themselves need improvement, but how we respond in advance is very important. So I don't know if that was too long-winded.
No, it's important to be said. And I always feel like we're backwards when it comes to, we're upside down when it comes to our systems with our children. We're not investing in the preventative side, as you've just stated, Kat. And we're spending more when they become adults and are entering into the system. And, we're punishing children for being traumatized, and that trauma leads to behavior that, typically we've always wanted to punish when we really need to treat the trauma. So, Sammy, I know you've done a lot of work on some of these issues. So why don't you chime in for just a bit, and then we'll hear from Brittany and Selena as well.
Oh my goodness. So first, can we just lift up that testimony? It was, yeah, please do. Like all the activist snaps, because it was incredible. And I loved listening to it. And just, it really speaks to so much of why I've wanted to do this work, why it's so important to have others that want to take on a justice component, and recognizing that there's true inequities within our systems overall. And a beautiful place to start is within our criminal justice system. And what I had decided to take on in my first term was really around domestic abuse and assault, going after implicit bias. I also went after second chance legislation and was proud to be a part of the subcommittee that enacted what was SB 152. It is now known as the Jobs and Hope Initiative. So we are looking to give folks an opportunity to get back to work, to get their education, to not be permanently downtrodden because of those experiences, those lived experiences, or even the mistakes that they made, but giving them a real shot at life and cutting back on recidivism. I also am a big proponent for rehabilitation and really seeking after that component of restorative justice. So we're not just after punitive measures here. We're not here to lock up the folks we're mad at. We're looking to only put away the folks that are truly dangerous to society and rehabilitate the individuals that can have a life to look forward to give back to their communities, and to really build forward from there. And I'm very proud of the successes that we've had. I could start with the Sexual Assault Survivors Bill of Rights, where we put in tenets that are just common sense to make sure that those individuals can come forward, speak their truth, and seek justice, and then have those parameters that keep them safe and protect that statement that they are looking to pursue and have a real chance and a real opportunity at closure and justice as a whole. We also had extended the statute of limitations. So now we have a full decade that we have now extended that parameter. Before it was only as short as a 3-year stint, I believe. So after age 18, you had until 21 to report. We are giving you now 10 years, because what we brought forth in Judiciary Committee was a conversation around anecdotal evidence and evidentiary support that stated that through therapy and through lived experience and through a number of ways to work through that trauma, it doesn't all necessarily come forward in a short amount of time. You need that opportunity to really process that and understand what did happen to you, what were your circumstances, and also because, again, of a culture that we've created, not just here in the state of West Virginia, but nationwide. The sociodynamics here have really stated that we haven't been believing survivors. We've very much put them in a place of holding on to that guilt and that burden. Then we also, here in the Eastern Panhandle, I had co-sponsored a bill with my colleague in the 61st District. He and I had put forth legislation that did see it through to the finish line this year, where we had implemented rehabilitation services as a part of avoiding potential incarceration as a repeat offender if you had narcotics, or if you had a drug addiction as part of the reoffense. So we're looking for ways to rehabilitate you and give you that opportunity to seek help before we're looking to lock you up. Again, we understand that addiction is an affliction, that it is an illness, and we are looking to get to that root cause and that core before we're saying we're done with you. Then we could go with really great legislation like Ban the Box, which was taking look to seek and take away hiring bias. So individuals that maybe had a prior offense in their youth or early on in life, are looking again to take that away and allow folks that opportunity to seek employment, gainful employment, and really get back into their communities and provide for their families. And we know that when you give folks an opportunity to do the right things, that they want that shot and they want to do right by their families and their communities, and it too cuts back on the recidivism rate. So maybe it's me being a romantic and optimist, but I genuinely believe in second chances, and that's what we were after in that bill. And I was proud to be its lead sponsor, but also to have bipartisan sponsors and bipartisan support. So we want to make that better. We want to see it through to the finish line and make it even more fully encompassing for next session, if I'm so fortunate to be there in that body. And then last but certainly not least, one of my very favorite bills that got nationwide attention and even international attention was what I love to call the Green Light Act. And yes, it was cannabis legislation, but where again its core was around criminal justice reform for folks that had prior offenses related to cannabis possession. Those need to be expunged. That needs to be taken off your record. When we're looking for individuals that have had illegal, we want to create that pocket of a reasonable amount of possession for individuals that, again, are seeking this as a form of medication. So if we're going to say medical marijuana should be part of the rule of the land, well, then we certainly cannot have law on the books that incarcerates individuals for something that we're saying is actually a medical substance that does more harm or more good than harm. So it's about shifting that culture and really living our values on this. And last but certainly not least, there is a racial justice component because, like my friend had just said, that this is disproportionately happening in marginalized communities and communities of color, and we want to wipe that out. There should be equity across the board here. This is not something that is just in our Black and Brown communities or even our LGBTQIA communities. This is very much across the board, something that could be beneficial to West Virginians, and we want to have a justice system that reflects what we're trying to do for folks across the board. That's just a little bit of it.
We've got a lot to cover, obviously, in the state, and I'll go to Brittany and Selena first, and then I'll go to Brittany. Selena, what do you say to someone who says, "Well, they've broken the law; they need to do their time"? I mean, they need to throw away the key. What do you say to folks who have that? You know, it's a punitive, you got to do it. What do you say?
Well, I'll say a couple things. There are certainly times in our society that people need to be separated from society for their own safety or the safety of others. I mean, that's a given. Do they deserve to rot and be treated with disrespect? Not have a chance to redeem themselves? Do they even deserve to go anyway? Because, we want to have a fair justice system and people are innocent until proven guilty. So there are, we want to have a fair system. We want people to be safe. We want communities to be safe, but we want to be able to rehabilitate people. And we want for them to re-enter society and be productive members of society. And, but I want to go back, I really want to go back to what Kat was talking about earlier, because I think it is really, really significant. And I tell you, it has done me a world of good to realize that there are more and more people who are legislators and wanting to be legislators that really get that. When you see, to take the example of, if all of a sudden you're kind of like a little story, you see people coming down the river needing help. They're in the water, they need help, and you're fishing them out of the water, and you realize, okay, well, there's, we gotta help these people. Absolutely, you need to help those people. You need to get them out of the water, and you might develop systems to get them out of the water faster. But if there are people continuously in the water that you're having to fish out, at some point you're going to go upriver and see what is the problem. Is a bridge out? What's going on? And what Kat was talking about earlier about ACEs, which is adverse childhood experiences. I mean, what we know from science, okay, this isn't theory, this is science, that people who experience the death of a parent, people who experience sexual abuse, people who experience, witness murder and domestic violence, there are changes in their brain that make it more difficult for them to pay attention in school, to learn. And because of this, and people who live in extreme poverty, who don't have their basic needs met. I mean, this is a scientific issue, and we know that there are things that we can do to help them. Just because you have a lot of adverse childhood experiences doesn't mean, oh my God, that we got to write those people off. They got a screwed up life. We have to learn, then say, well, how do we build resilience in these people? And this goes back to the education system and foster care system and family systems and after school systems. There are things that we can do as a society to help people who have these experiences heal from that and build resilience. And it drives me crazy, to hear about the cost of a jail bill, like that. Like, how are we gonna fix the jail bill? Well, you can't fix it in a meeting. You can't fix it by changing one little thing. We have to really focus on what are we going to do in society what are we going to do as legislators to build our society in a way that we are making sure that people have their needs met. And, if we want to have a growing, thriving West Virginia, we have to understand that there are very, very significant issues, and there's answers, and we have to figure out how to make sure that people get the answers, and make sure teachers get the tools, make sure parents get the tools that they need, that we can really help people. That's how we're gonna keep people out of jail. That's how you're gonna fix the jail bill problem, is really going back and addressing issues very early on.
I agree with that. Between Selena and Kat, just really speaking to this issue, I would love it if restorative justice and a compassion component wasn't considered something that was a progressive issue. Okay, I believe that wholeheartedly. That should not be considered a leftist issue. That should be across the board. That should be something that we are very much speaking to the root of. When we're talking about creating true equity, when we're talking about what it means to create a dynamic that there isn't an implicit bias. I think when folks hear those terms like that, they're equating that with maybe it being around just racial reform or just about Black and Brown communities. And maybe it's because they're equating it with those communities having disproportionately the higher rates of these occurrences. Maybe that's the case, but then I want to ask you, why is that? And that really does go back to socioeconomic disparity. It also goes back to the fact that, are we addressing root cause? And I don't think I could have said it any better than you did just then, Selena or Kat, when you were speaking to the core principles of restorative justice. There are a number of adverse experiences. This is, again, anecdotal evidence. This is not something that's convoluted. We're not talking about something that's in the bedside astrologer, y'all. This is psychology. This is science. And we're talking about what trauma does to the brain. So if you want to know how to really rebuild your community and how to make sure that you have a workforce that can really withstand all the industry and economic development that you want to bring to the state of West Virginia, go back and take care of your people. Go back and take care of children, and you'll really understand what it means to build up people and people power before you take on, whatever corporate entity that you'd like to court this day,
Well, I'd really like to hear from Brittany, because as a teacher, tell us about some of the things that you're seeing in your classroom, you're experiencing. Maybe you could expand on that a little bit. Kind of talking about the ACEs.
Yeah, so we've covered ACEs 2 weeks in a row, which is incredible. I'm super excited about it, because this is everyone said it. It's science. It's not made up. It's a real thing. And we kind of, it seems like by putting these people, disproportionately in jail for crimes that may or may not be, small crimes, we are writing them off. Like, because somebody did this thing to you, you now have to suffer because of it further, not just you living in, your consciousness that has been, deeply affected by this trauma, but now you have to spend your life locked behind bars. And so we see this a lot in our school system. And it's hard to talk about, especially today being the last day of grades and everything. This is a challenging thing to talk about, but it's something that boys experience more than women, in terms of how they're written up in school for things that they've done, especially with bullying and things like that. We see that our young boys experiencing that more. People of color obviously are experiencing this more, but yeah, I think this is just the school system isn't even that unique compared to what we see out in the real world. I mean, we have so many problems in terms of systems just by saying that we had an entire class of corrections officers doing a Nazi salute last year, that we had I'm just going to get real with this. We had our governor call a school of mostly Black women. They called those girls thugs. And in terms of what Sammy was talking about, in terms of, sexual assault survivors, we have 2 presidential candidates, and both of them have been accused of sexual assault, and those are our only options this year. So we have significant problems in terms of the way we're treating people. We are locking up people for drug offenses, but we have white collar criminals who have, in effect, murdered a lot more people, and they get off scot-free. So we see these crimes of somebody stealing something from a gas station, especially if they're a person of color, and they're locked away for however long. And then they have to put up with probation, and they can't get their job because they have to check that on their, their job application. But then you have someone who has, taken people's lifetime of savings because of some shady thing that they've done in their corporation, and then nothing ever happens to them. In fact, everyone helps them cover it up, and they're out of it. So this is a huge issue. This is something that's really frustrating. It's hard to talk to my students about this and help them through it. But I am really, like Sammy said, I'm really positive that we are headed in a right direction, that we are talking about this, that I'm saying controversial things on this stream, because it needs to be said. And our school systems are really starting to move into that trauma-informed teaching, which I think is really important, because that's the only way we're going to solve this. Like Selena said, like Kat said, like Sammy said, we need to stop this at the beginning. We can't just be trying to plug the holes as they come. We need to stop this at the start.
Agreed. And to be fair, I don't think your comments are controversial. I think they're spot on, and I feel like there's a lot of folks that have to be thinking what you're thinking, Brittany. I'm one of them. So,
well, we're in a
I
society.
validate those thoughts.
Yeah, we're in a society where it takes a video coming to the light of day for 2 men to be arrested for killing a Black man, for no reason.
Right.
I mean, I think if we're going to solve these problems, we have to be real in our communications. We have to be able to speak our mind. We have to be able to say our truth. And only then can we really have some honest, authentic, and genuine conversations about what people are going through.
I agree, Sarah. I really agree. There were a few things popped up in this conversation, and ladies, if you want to unmute too, because we don't need to take turns. Just jump in here. But just a few call outs. I did see a comment around Betsy DeVos and Title IX. So I do want to jump into that. I do have a policy on the book around affirmative consent. So if we could kind of parking lot that one, because I would love for us to really delve into that, especially around whether she meant to or not, she did kind of lift up a rape culture, Brittany Bartlett. So it's very much that we need to speak about. Kat had, I believe you had first mentioned Ahmaud. I think, Sarah, when you just lifted it up, I think this is an absolute timely conversation because, again, we're talking about biases within our own culture and how quick folks were to look for ways that he was a young man, actually a boy. He was an athlete. One of the first ways that they wanted to bury this was to somehow find a way that he could have possibly committed a crime, as opposed to what actually occurred here. And I think it's important that we really talk about that in a very open way, like some of the occurrences that happened, and then whether it was a justice or injustice, that it took a national movement and a hashtag to make sure that 3 men were brought in to even see justice. They haven't been incarcerated yet, guys. So, like, we haven't seen the criminal justice system work here. We're just talking about the fact that they were brought in for questioning.
Can we also acknowledge that this happened in February? Because people thought it happened like last week. This happened in February. They saw the video. What is that tweet that said they didn't, they didn't react because they saw the video. They reacted because we saw the video.
You got it. You got it. And it's so real to speak about this because I've seen the threads, and frankly, I've never been angrier. I've never been sicker to my stomach. So you're just going to have to forgive me for being hot about this. But the comments in the state of West Virginia to be like, oh, we've made this a race issue. It is a race issue. It was racism. It was murder. It's 2020. And I'm about to have a conversation about lynchings. Lynchings, ladies and gentlemen watching.
Yeah.
It is disgusting that we're having that type of a conversation here in 2020, the same conversations that my father had as a Black man being raised in segregation, something that my grandfather had to address being in the military, and it was a segregated America when he came home from war. I want us to understand what that means, that in this millennium, we're talking about lynchings of a Black man in Georgia. I also want us to very much lift up the conversation about the fact that privilege, the very definition of privilege, is to never have to think about or second guess wearing a hoodie, taking a run, having your cell phone in your hand, or a bag of Skittles at night. Privilege, ladies and gentlemen. And had there not been a coalition that decided that they were going to take justice grassroots and have validators from across the country and the full spectrum of color, which thank you to my white friends and allies, but should it take that type of validation for us to believe when murder occurred right in front of our eyes and there was full proof, evidentiary support? That's what we've been reduced to as a society.
Well,
and that's not a point of pride.
Yeah, if I could, let us also remember James Means, the 15-year-old young man that was shot here in Charleston and died.
Absolutely.
Yes.
Because, the older gentleman, white gentleman, felt he was doing something wrong.
On the East End.
On the East End. So, it hits pretty close to home.
Always.
As well. So, and I don't know, 4 years ago, between Christmas Day and New Year's Eve or New Year's Day, 4 or 5 young Black men under the age of 25 were shot to death.
Yes.
Within 2 weeks of period of time.
Yeah.
And I think one of the biggest call outs that we can say here, and I'm going to speak from personal experience, so I certainly do not want to speak for, I see Delegate Danielle Walker in the threads. Kat, I obviously don't want to speak for you, but I know that you can very much attest to this. This is lived experience. Okay, this is not something I have not experienced myself in my lifetime. I have absolutely been called racial epithets. I have gotten that bias. I have been called a murderer for a traffic violation. These are things that happen now. This is very real for us. And, you know, I cannot relay that enough, that this isn't something that's distanced or that I am an observer or looker on. Like this
Right.
is real for us. So
And let me just
And I
throw
think
this out real
Oh.
quick, and we'll go to you next, Kat, is how can we change anything if we don't have the people who have undergone and experienced those issues with a seat at the table and a voice being heard?
you got it. Get him, Kat.
it's very, very, very difficult, you know, for that to happen. But the one thing that I will say is it's very interesting to me that, and I think West Virginia is in a prime position to take some leadership in this arena. You know, whether, you know, we can debate the reasons for why, you know, West Virginia seceded from Virginia. But, you know, given that history, we can look at West Virginia State, and given the history of, you know, a human living laboratory of, you know, interracial relations. But more importantly, I think it's very interesting, and I'll harken back to my father a little bit. There was a time that he could not walk past 25th Street going into Dunbar off of 25 because he would be run out of the community. And it always used to make him crack up as a senior citizen, because he would go, you know, to Dunbar then and go to the Krogers, and all the people that used to call him names all had brown grandchildren. And there's a lot of interracial relationships here, and there are a lot of biracial children here. And so, you know, when we talk about privilege, when we talk about race, when we talk about implicit bias and cultural competencies, we're primed for being able to expand that base, because there are a lot of white folks that have brown children or grandchildren. Certainly, even in the foster care system, there are a lot of you know, foster parents that have children of color, and it's important that we make sure that they are culturally, you know, aware of what's happening, so that they don't impose limitations on the children that they're raising. And sometimes they don't even realize, you know, their own microaggressions, and so it's a really big issue to tackle. You know, and I had a woman who was talking about, and she was so proud of the fact that she had adopted, or not, I think they had adopted a young Black girl into their family. And she just casually was saying, oh, and she was Black as sin, and, you know, but we don't treat her any differently. And I'm sitting there thinking, I don't even know where to begin with you in this conversation. And so these are type of things that are happening over and over and over again. But I think that we're primed to have those conversations just because of our history, because of the racial demographics here, that maybe we can get some of this onto the table and make some change.
Agreed.
So
I don't know if anybody else has
spot on. And I'm going to bring DL in because we're actually over by about 15 minutes, but I think this is tribute to the fact that we have so many things to talk about, and that we have candidates who are willing to be candid and authentic and have conversations together in how to fix this and how to fix the issues. So, you know, again, for people who are watching, this is your opportunity to reach out and talk to these candidates and ask, what are your plans? Ask them questions. And tell them what you're facing. I mean, we can't fix problems we don't know about. So if you have a problem, you share that with your candidate, share that with your elected officials. So DL, again, we could go on for another hour, and I know that there's a lot left unsaid. So we'll put that on a parking lot for next week. But we'll bring you in, DL, for final words before we sign off. You have to unmute yourself, though, first. There you are.
Okay, thank you, Sarah. Not just for producing this, but just allowing us to steer the conversation in terms of, we obviously took on a lot this week, and we apologize for running over, but it brings back my word of the day, which is trust. That when you bring up issues of judicial systems, it just has to bring up the issue of racism and the issue of white supremacy that is becoming more overt in this country. And, a lot of these topics will be revisited over the next several Mondays we have before the June 9th election. But you can trust that we will take on the issues that need to be discussed, and that issue next week is clean elections, money in politics, voting rights. There aren't a lot of requirements to be a mountain mama. I forgot to say at the beginning that every woman speaks for herself. She runs her own campaign. The main requirement is that you have to want to be a mountain mama. You have to want to get to know and support the other women that are running for office. And bringing up the ballot issue, all the 25 mountain mamas on the primary ballot are Democrats. So if you are a non-party independent voter, you must request a Democratic ballot to vote for. Hopefully you have a mountain mama near you. But the other one requirement is that you have to support measures that get money out of politics. There are recommendations by a group called Citizens for Clean Elections. That is another group that I work with, and that is kind of our starting point for steps to be taken to get money out of politics. Next week, Delegate Amanda Estep Burton will be back to discuss that, along with several mountain mamas, and there's a lot of them that went on, so we may have a full changing screen next week. But until then, I trust that you will do what you can for mountain mamas and for other good candidates on the primary ballot, that you'll check out our website and share it on social media, and that you will have a very good week. Thank you.
Well, and I will end real quick. Barbara, Delegate Fleischhauer was not able to join us due to some technical issues. We're going to put some information up that she was going to share with us about the fact that West Virginia has the lowest percentage of women serving in the legislature in the United States. So we definitely want to address that. And thank you all for joining us on the live stream. Those that you commented, thank you so much. For those of you that are joining on the replay, we appreciate you tuning in and hearing us on the issues. Again, if you want to leave comments, please do. And we'll see you next Monday for another event of Monday with Mountain Mamas. Take care.
Thank you.
Bye.